power is pure psychology. Under the pressure, we had to think, we had to be creative, we had to be inventive, we had to be strategic. The human brain evolved under immense amounts of pressure. Your brain needs pressure. It needs constant pressure. And stress and pressure is not a bad thing. And other languages have that sense. And so language can have that possibility where it opens up. It's not just this one-track meaning. It has other valences, other possibilities to it, right? I want to get at the core and the reality of what I'm trying to write about. And so when I get it, I feel it, and I know that I've done that. Getting back to my studies of the ancient world, which is main part of me, one thing that always excited me was this concept of the ancient Greeks, that more harm is caused in this world by stupid, incompetent people than by evil people, right? And there's a word in Greek called phronesis, which is a form of wisdom, to use your title here, but it's a form of practical wisdom, to be able to get things done, to navigate through life, navigate through people, to be balanced and get things done. Okay? So, what makes people stupid, and right now we have a lot of stupid people in this world. There always have been stupid people, but because there are more people on the planet, exponentially, there are more stupid people on the planet. What makes people stupid, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to tell it like it is their certainty that they have all the answers. This is what's going on with our government. This is what's wrong, with this or that. This is what people should be like, blah, 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 blah. So you're narrowing your focus to this little tiny little rail, something that you heard from somebody else. It's not even your own stupid idea. So you've absorbed it on the internet, whatever, and you're going down on this kind of monorail path. Meanwhile, the world is all around you, and you're just going like zoom like that because you're so certain you have the answer. And when you have leaders, this is to get back to the Greek thing, when you have leaders who are so certain, they enter a country into a war that they haven't been thought out of, because and so the paradigm in ancient culture was the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta, the war that ended up kind of being the end of Athenian democracy and of their golden era, right? And it was the idea, and Thucydides, one of the greatest writers who ever lived, wrote the history of the Peloponnesian War, living at that time. He was saying that the leaders thought, oh, this will be so easy. And think of all the great things when we go and we take Sicily and we conquer that, the whole world will end, the Sparta will be destroyed, right? It wasn't thought through. They were so certain of the answer that they didn't think of the parameters, right? They didn't think really on a grand strategic level. So people who are certain of things are very stupid. And when they have power, they're very, very dangerous. I'm not saying evil people aren't dangerous, but incompetent, stupid people who are so certain, who haven't thought things through, are just as dangerous as evil people. I like to think of who the human animal is. I like to take this out of the little specific and go into the meta area here. And what it meant to be human, we're a very creative species, right? We have language, we have consciousness, we have immense powers. Those powers developed under the pressures of necessity, of having to get things done, of having to survive in a very brutal, ruthless world where a leopard could pop out tomorrow and eat me, where there were dangers all around, where food was scarce. And under the pressure, we had to think, we had to be creative, we had to be inventive, we had to be strategic. The human brain evolved under immense amounts of pressure, okay? That's how the brain works. And I almost like to think of it in terms of barometric pressure. So in your brain, when you're feeling that barometric pressure, it's like, I gotta get this done. or I'm going to fail and this project won't happen and people will laugh at me. You work like a fiend. Energy, your whole body responds, right? Your blood gets moving. You accomplish things that would normally take you months. You do it in days because you feel that pressure. You take away that pressure and you don't know what to do. And I've got like 3 years, I could do this or that. Another, you just wander around, you're lost. You have no energy, you have no focus. You're maybe playing video games, maybe you're kind of distracting yourself in the moment. But but your energy is just being dissipated in like 20 different directions. So your brain needs pressure. It needs constant pressure. And stress and pressure is not a bad thing. We have this thing where we feel like stress is bad. It's bad for you. Bad. You need to relax, man. You need to chill. Stress will kill you. No, being bored will kill you. Not having anything to do will kill you is much more dangerous than stress. Yes, you can work too hard. You can work where there's no soul involved. I work like a fiend because I'm writing a book, and it's a very hard process for me. And I'm working far too much, but man, I love it. It's fantastic, right? And it could kill me. The stress could kill me, gave me a stroke. But I'd rather die under the stress than be bored and have nothing to do. Okay? So feeling that pressure, it makes your eyes pop open. It makes your brain focus. It makes you alert. It makes you want to live. It makes everything seem exciting to you because you've got to get things done. So I'm writing a book right now. I could take 12 years to write it, but that wouldn't be I wouldn't feel good about it. So I give myself deadlines. I gave myself a deadline of finishing this chapter by July 31st. Here it's August 7th. I haven't finished it, but now I'm working double hard to try and finish it in time, because if I didn't have a deadline, I would take forever. So create pressure for yourself is a good thing. I gave a talk recently in which I talked about Thomas Edison, the great inventor. And Thomas Edison was a young man. He's in his early 30s. He'd invented the phonograph and a new wave for the telegraph, but he hadn't really had any major inventions. He had started Menlo Park, his industrial park, for doing research. We're talking about the 1870s, I believe. But he did something very interesting and very strange. I don't know how conscious it was, but he gave an interview with a newspaper. And he said, I've been working on creating the incandescent light bulb. Now, before that, there was the arc light, which was a light that was really powerful. It used far too much energy. You couldn't use it in the house. The way houses were lit was with gaslight. Gaslight was dangerous, it was explosive, and the companies in America that had a monopoly on it, so the prices, it was very corrupt business. So he goes, I'm working on the incandescent light bulb. The reporter's going, that's interesting. Goes, yeah, I'm close to nailing it. Wow. And he goes, yeah, and in 5 years, I'm going to light the entire city of New York with the incandescent light, with electric light. Whoa, they go crazy. They publish this article, and the stock prices of gas start going down, 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 down. Money flows into his coffers because the cheapness of a light bulb, the profits are just insane. So money is pouring in. He goes back to his Menlo Park where he develops ideas, and his employees who are reading about this go, Mr. Edison, what are you thinking? You had just tinkered with the incandescent light bulb. We're not even near inventing it. We're not even near creating it. And the idea of lighting New York, it's what were you thinking? What were you smoking? The equivalent thereof. And he goes, well, gentlemen, I said it to this major newspaper. We better get to work. We better make it happen. What happened with all the money that came in, he could now hire the people to do it. But the pressure of getting that done in 5 years made him do it in 5 years. It was a monumental work of persistence and discipline and detail. But he had a deadline. He didn't want his reputation. He didn't want to disappoint the public. He had to get it done in 5 years, and he did get it done in 5 years. So he created his own pressure by using the publicity angle. So when I wrote the 48 Laws of Power, I've somebody through my whole life loves playing games. I don't mean that in the abstract sense. I mean literally, like chess, backgammon, sports, poker, whatever. And I like the cleanness of a game. It's like you do this and you can win, etc. But there's also a psychological element in it. So particularly when you're playing poker and you're bluffing and I was always fascinated by this. It's a game of chance. You don't really know what cards you're going to get. But that fellow over there, he's been bluffing. He bluffed before. I'm sure he did. He's going to do it again, right? So the psychology starts entering into the picture in a game of chance. It's not a game of chance. There's certainly skill involved, but a lot of it's chance. And because he bluffed before and he's got that look in his eye, it could be a woman, I don't mean to generalize. All right, I'm going to fold, okay? So you don't realize that so much of the game of power has nothing to do with data and you being a better person at something. A lot of it is pure psychology. And intimidating people and winning before you even enter into a battle. So if you have a reputation, you carry it with you. And the reputation doesn't have to be real. Personally, I don't know how valid this is. I have this reputation now of being this Machiavellian characters, and so if Robert's 5 minutes late for a meeting, it means he's playing a game, even though it's probably just the traffic. But my reputation now kind of put people a little bit on their heels, where it's not necessarily true about me. And so it's an extra form of power. So the idea the overall arching idea to pull us out of the specific is power is pure psychology. Pure psychology. And what I mean by that is the CEO of a company, he doesn't get there based on, it's not like baseball where balls, you hit, you have a good batting average or OPS. All right, you're going to get in the lineup. They're going to bat you in the cleanup spot. Okay, life isn't like that. So the way somebody rises to the CEO, and I know because I was on the board of directors of a publicly traded company, is not about metrics. It's not about things that they've actually done. It's about psychology, right? People rise to positions of power because they know how to play the game, and they know how to play the game of psychology. They know how to appear. They know how to play the optics. They know how to intimidate. They know how to say less than necessary. They know all the psychological little gambits. And that's why I wrote the 48 Laws of Power. It's kind of like, this is the game of life, the game of power. The rules are a little bit nebulous. But here's how you play. You play by mastering these little psychological bits. One of them is your reputation. I'm always trying to get at what's real and not at what's theoretical. I have a real dislike of abstraction for its own sake, right? It feels like it's a way of eluding something. It's an evasion. I want to get at the core and the reality of what I'm trying to write about. And so when I get it, I feel it, and I know that I've done that. And I have the reader in my mind, and I know the reader can connect to it. It's going to have a personal appeal. Whereas I have a tendency to be abstract and professorial and theoretical. I cross all of that out. If you saw my notebooks, 95% of it's crossed out, and I don't let the public ever see that side of me because I don't like it. I want my books to feel like I'm hitting something that's actually truthful and real that people don't like to talk about, kind of thing, So right now I'm writing about what is our self, what is the sense of self that we have in our world. It's a very limited idea of the self. We have a very limited idea of our consciousness. We have a very limited idea of what it means to be a human being in the 21st century. We're actually much more immense and much more interesting than we think we are. We have these possibilities, these connections, because we're a part of something incredibly vast. And to have consciousness is absolutely an astounding thing. right? So I want to sort of expand what you, the reader, thinks of who you are, what yourself is. It's much larger than you imagine. But I have to convey that in language that feels right to me, that feels authentic, that feels like everybody in Africa, in China, in India, in Idaho is going to be able to relate to it. That's why I like looking at other languages. I speak several other languages and I'm constantly learning them. And right now I'm reading a lot about an African culture called the Akan in West Africa, in Ghana. And their concepts of the soul, the spirit, and the body. And they have a word in there called sun sum. And we translate it to spirit. But then I'm reading the African philosophers who actually know that word, and they go, it's not the same as the word spirit, and then they go on and describe it. And that one word contains all of these other worlds that are so weird and interesting that the word spirit in English does not convey, right? You know, and other languages have that sense. And so language can have that possibility where it opens up. It's not just this one track meaning. It has other valences, other possibilities to it, right? And so, yeah, we're kind of deadening our language in a way. And, you know, if you study like other cultures, you know, Eskimos had like 1,000 words for snow, and we have one word. You know, Russians have like 40 words for the color blue, and we have one word, kind of thing. As the language gets smaller and smaller and more uniform, our thoughts become more and more limited and uniform. So to hear a word like inner sky, it opens up all these other ideas in your mind. Whereas we don't have a word like that in English, you know? And then because I'm doing things with Zen, Japanese language is so rich with things that we can't possibly even begin to express in English, you know? So, yeah.